part I'm most proud of isn't the work. It's what the work bought my daughter. I fixed it with a part that cost $4 and change, a $4 part a Saturday afternoon, and 32 years of knowing exactly what I was doing. That's the whole story, except it isn't, because nothing about that day was simple, and I'd be lying if I said I walked away from it the same man who showed up. My name is Seth Pruitt. I'm a plumber, not the kind with a fleet of vans and a jingle on the radio. The kind with one truck, one helper on busy days, and a reputation built over a decade of showing up when I said I would, and charging what the job was actually worth. I run my operation out of a small shop attached to my house in Clarksville, Tennessee. 3 bedrooms, a dog named Bucket, and my daughter Abby, who is 9 years old and the reason I get out of bed every morning. Abby's mom left when Abby was 2. That's not a story for today. What matters is that it's been just the 2 of us for 7 years now, and we've built something that feels like a real life. Not a perfect life, but a real one. Abby makes her own lunch on school days. She knows how to use a pipe wrench. She draws pictures of houses and writes little captions under them that say things like, "This is where we will live when we are rich." I tape them to the refrigerator. I haven't taken a single one down. Last spring, a call came in on a Tuesday evening. I almost didn't answer it. Abby and I were in the middle of a board game, and I had a rule about not taking calls after 7. But the number had a Nashville prefix, and something made me pick up. The woman on the other end had a voice like she was used to people listening when she talked. Controlled. Even. The kind of voice that doesn't ask. It informs. She told me her name was Margaret Alcott. She told me she had a problem at her property in the Brentwood area. She told me 3 other plumbing companies had already looked at it, and all 3 had given her quotes she described as insulting. She'd found my name through a reference, she said, a former client of mine who used to live in her neighborhood. I asked her what the problem was. She said her radiant floor heating system had stopped working. The boiler was running. The thermostat was fine, but 2 of the 4 zones in the house were completely dead. No heat, no circulation, no response. She'd had the system serviced the previous fall. The company she used told her the manifold was failing and the zone valves needed to be replaced. They quoted her $14,000. A second company confirmed the assessment. Came in at $11,500. The third said the manifold was the least of her problems, that the whole system needed to be repetived and reprimanded, and handed her a quote for $22,000. I didn't say anything right away. I'd worked on radiant systems before, not exotic ones, but enough, and the symptoms she was describing, 2 dead zones, boiler working fine, didn't automatically mean a failing manifold. Didn't mean much of anything, actually, until you were standing in front of the system with your hands on it. I told her I could come Thursday morning. She said she needed someone sooner. I asked what sooner meant. She said tomorrow. I told her I had 2 jobs already scheduled for Wednesday. She didn't say anything for a moment, and then she said she would pay double my diagnostic rate and hold a credit card on file for whatever the repair turned out to be. I said I'd move some things around. I want to be honest about what I was thinking when I pulled up to her address the next morning. I had looked the property up the night before. That is a thing I do sometimes when a job is in a neighborhood I don't know well, just to get a sense of what I'm walking into. What I was walking into was a 12,000 square foot house on 3 acres in the most expensive zip code in the state of Tennessee. When I searched Margaret Alcott's name, the results told me she was the founder of a logistics company that had gone public 4 years earlier. Her net worth, according to a business magazine profile, was somewhere north of $1 billion. I sat in my truck for a minute before I got out. I have done that a few times in my life, paused before walking into something, tried to get my head right. It's not nerves exactly. It's more like calibration. I am good at my job, I know that. But I also know that certain kinds of people look at a man in work clothes driving a truck that has a dent in the rear quarter panel, and they make a decision about him before he opens his mouth. I wanted to be ready for that. A housekeeper let me in and walked me through a foyer that was bigger than my living room, dining room, and kitchen combined. The floors were marble. There was a painting on the wall that probably cost more than my house. I kept my eyes professional and followed her to a back utility room where the mechanical systems lived. Margaret Alcott was already in there. She was in her late 50s, I guessed. Silver hair pulled back, dressed like she'd come from a meeting or was about to go to one. She looked at me the way people look at a menu when they're not sure they ordered right. She said, "You're Seth Pruitt?" I said I was. She said, "You look young." I told her I was 41, and that I'd been doing this since I was 17, which meant I'd been doing it longer than some of the guys quoting her $22,000 had been alive. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. She showed me the system. I spent about 4 minutes just looking at it before I touched anything. I looked at the manifold. I looked at the zone valves. I looked at the circulator pump. I looked at the air separator. I looked at the expansion tank. I checked the pressure gauge. And then I started doing what any competent plumber does when a radiant system has dead zones and everything else appears to be running fine. I started checking the simple things first. Margaret stood in the doorway and watched me. I could feel her watching. At about the 12-minute mark, I found it. There was an automatic air vent on the secondary loop, a small brass fitting about the size of a AA battery, and it had failed. The float inside had corroded and stuck in the closed position. Air couldn't escape the loop. Airlock. 2 zones down, not because anything was failing, not because the manifold was going bad, not because the system needed to be repataped, because a $4 part had given out. I straightened up. I said, "I found your problem." She looked at the fitting in my hand. I said, "This is an automatic air vent. When they fail, air gets trapped in the loop and circulation stops. Your manifold is fine. Your zone valves are fine. Your SUSM valves are fine." She looked at the fitting for a long moment, then she looked at me. She said, "How much is that part?" I told her it was around $4 at any supply house, that I happened to have one in my truck that would fit. She didn't say anything. I want to tell you the silence was satisfying. It wasn't exactly because I knew what that silence meant. It meant she was doing arithmetic. That meant she was thinking about 3 different companies with offices and websites and factory-trained technicians who had looked at the system and told her the problem was the manifold. It meant she was thinking about $22,000. I went out to my truck and got the part. Came back, replaced the vent, purged the air from the loop, restored circulation to both zones. I checked the system pressure. I ran it through a cycle. I put my hand on the floor near each manifold outlet and felt the warmth coming up through the concrete. The whole repair took 51 minutes. When I was cleaning up, Margaret Alcott said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Sure." She said, "How did you know to look there first?" I told her I didn't know to look there first. I told her I always start with the simplest possible explanation and work outward. I told her dead zones with a functioning boiler almost never mean a manifold problem. I told her the manifold on her system looked to be in perfectly good condition, and there was nothing in its behavior that would have indicated failure. She said, "So they lied to me." I thought about that for a second. I said, "I don't know what they did. I know what I found. Maybe they didn't look hard enough. Maybe they assumed. Maybe the math worked out better for them a different way." I paused. I'm not in the business of speaking to what other people do. I'm only in the business of telling you what I actually see. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "What do I owe you?" I gave her my rate. $200 for the diagnostic, $140 for the hour of labor, $4 for the part. I did not charge double, even though she'd offered it. The job was the job. I wrote it on the invoice the same way I write every invoice. She looked at the number. She said, "This is $344. I said yes. She said, "After what I was quoted." I said I could only charge for what I did. She wrote the check, and then she held it out, and she said, "I have to tell you something." She said it in a way that made me stop and look at her. "The reference who gave me your name was Patricia Rowe. She told me you were the most honest tradesman she'd ever hired." I thought that was a strange thing to say about a plumber. I understand it now. I took the check. I thanked her. I was almost to the door of the utility room when she said, "Do you have children?" It's a question that changes my face. I know it does. I can feel it happen. I said I had a daughter, 9 years old, Abby. Something shifted in Margaret's expression that I didn't fully understand at the time. She asked if Abby was healthy. It was an odd follow-up question, and I gave her an honest answer, which was the kind of honest answer I don't give most people. I said Abby had been diagnosed with a heart condition called supraventricular tachycardia when she was 6, that most of the time she was completely fine, that she wore a monitor when she was active, that she was on the wait list to see a pediatric cardiologist at Vanderbilt for a procedure called an ablation that had a very high success rate and would likely resolve the problem entirely, that the wait was long, that the procedure was expensive, that I was working on it. I don't know why I said all of that. I never say all of that. Margaret Alcott didn't say she was sorry. I was glad she didn't. She just nodded slowly like she was filing the information away somewhere careful. I said goodbye and walked out to my truck. I sat there for a second before I started the engine. Bucket was waiting at home. Abby would be back from school in 2 hours. I had another service call in the afternoon, a water heater replacement in Smyrna. Life was the size it was, and I'd learned to be grateful for that. I pulled out of the driveway and didn't think too much about Margaret Alcott or her beautiful broken house. 3 days later, she called again. She said she had a question. She said she'd been talking to some people. She said she understood that the ablation procedure Abby was waiting for was something Vanderbilt's pediatric cardiology department was actually very good at, but that the wait list for the clinic was 14 months long for patients without an existing referral relationship. I said yes, I knew that. She said she had been on the board of Vanderbilt's Children's Hospital Foundation for 11 years. I didn't say anything. She said she wanted to be clear about something. She said she was not offering charity. She said she did not believe in charity, not in the condescending version of it where someone with money makes a decision about what someone without money deserves. She said what she was offering was an introduction, that she knew the chief of the pediatric cardiology department personally, that if I was open to it, she would make a call. I sat down. I don't remember deciding to sit down. I was just sitting. I told her I needed to think about it. She said she understood. I hung up and I looked at the wall in my shop for probably 10 minutes. I thought about what it means to accept something from someone. I thought about whether there was a version of this that put me in debt in a way I couldn't see the edges of. I thought about Abby. I thought about the drawings on the refrigerator. I thought about the monitor she wore on her wrist when she ran in gym class, and the way she pulled her sleeve down over it so the other kids wouldn't ask. I called Margaret Alcott back. I said yes. I said thank you. And I said that I hoped she knew she didn't owe me anything. That the $4 part was the $4 part regardless of what happened next. She said she knew that. She said that was precisely why she was calling. The appointment was scheduled inside of a week. I sat in a waiting room at the Monroe Carell Jr. Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt on a Thursday morning with Abby next to me, eating animal crackers out of a paper bag. She was wearing a shirt that said Future Engineer on it, which she'd picked out herself. She was not scared. She has never been particularly scared of doctors, which is something I think she decided on purpose when she was small, the way kids sometimes decide things about themselves before they're old enough to know they're making a decision. The cardiologist's name was Dr. Patricia Huang. She was thorough and calm and spoke to Abby directly, not through me, which Abby responded to immediately. She went through the scans and the history and the monitor data, and she agreed that Abby was a good candidate for the ablation and that they would like to schedule it within the next 6 weeks. I thanked her. She said, "Margaret speaks very highly of you." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. In the hallway afterward, Abby took my hand. She does this less than she used to, because she's 9 now, and 9 is a complicated age for hand-holding. I held on. She said, "Dad, are you crying?" I said I had something in my eye. She said, "Both eyes?" I said it was a very dusty hallway. She laughed. "It is the best sound in my life." I thought about Margaret Alcott's face when I told her about Abby. I thought about how she hadn't said she was sorry, and how that had been exactly right. I thought about a woman who had built a billion-dollar company and sat on foundation boards and moved through a world of marble floors and abstract paintings, and how she had chosen, without fanfare, without any particular desire for credit, to make one phone call. I have been asked since then whether I think the call was worth more than I charged her, whether I feel like the $344 was too low, whether I left money on the table. I always say the same thing. A $4 part is a $4 part. That's not philosophy, that's just the job. But what you do after the job, who you decide to be when the invoice is paid and the truck is packed and you could just drive away, that's something else. That's the part nobody puts on an estimate. Margaret Alcott didn't have to call me back. She didn't have to talk to anyone at Vanderbilt. She could have written a check and gone on with her life, and I would never have known the difference. She didn't do that. And I have thought about her a lot since then, about what it means to have power and choose not to use it like a weapon, about what it means to see someone doing honest work and decide that honest work deserves something honest back. Abby had the ablation 6 weeks later. 2 hours. Outpatient procedure. She was home by dinner, eating cereal on the couch and watching a nature documentary about octopuses, and she told me that octopuses have 3 hearts, and she said she wished she had 3 hearts, so there'd be 2 backup ones in case the main one ever got weird again. I told her that sounded reasonable. I sat next to her on the couch with Bucket between us, and the house smelled like cereal and dog, and the drawing on the refrigerator that says "This is where we will live when we are rich" caught the light from the kitchen, and I thought, we're already there. We just didn't know what rich looked like until right now. She's been running in gym class without the monitor for 3 months. I haven't taken a single drawing down. I still think about the moment I was standing in that utility room, holding a $4 brass fitting, knowing what it meant and knowing what 3 other companies had told Margaret Alcott it meant. There was no drama in the room, no music, just a small corroded part and a very long silence. That silence taught me something I already knew, but hadn't said out loud in a while. The world will charge you for what it can get away with. That's not cynicism, it's just observation, and the only thing that pushes back against it is a person who decides, quietly and without applause, to do the work right anyway. I didn't go to Margaret's house trying to prove anything. I went because a job needed doing. I started with the simplest explanation because that's what competent people do. They don't reach for the expensive answer before they've ruled out the cheap one. That's not a trick. It's just discipline. It's the kind of clear-headed thinking that doesn't get loud about itself but shows up every single time, job after job, year after year, until people like Patricia Rowe are telling billionaires to call you by name. I think about Seth Pruitt. I think about myself. At 17, learning this trade from a man who told me that the most dangerous thing in any skilled profession is someone who stopped being curious, who decided they already knew, who reached for the big fix because the big fix paid better and the customer didn't know the difference. I made a decision back then that I would not be that person, and I have had to remake that decision probably 10,000 times since, on days when it would have been easier to pad an invoice, to quote high and see what happened, to let someone's lack of knowledge become my advantage. I didn't do it, not once, and I won't pretend that was always easy or that it always paid off in obvious ways. Most of the time, honest work just leads to more honest work, quietly, without ceremony. But then there are days like that one. Margaret Alcott didn't help Abby because I fixed her heating system. She helped Abby because of who I was when I fixed it. Because I charged her $344 when I could have charged her $3,000. Because I told her the truth about what the other companies might have done, calmly and without bitterness, and then let it go. Because I didn't perform integrity, I just had it. That's the thing about character. It doesn't announce itself, it just accumulates slowly in the small decisions that nobody's watching, and then one day somebody's watching, and it turns out they've been watching longer than you knew. Abby runs in gym class now without the monitor on her wrist. She still pulls her sleeve down out of habit sometimes, and then catches herself and leaves it up. I see her do it, and I don't say anything. That's her victory to carry however she wants to carry it. There's a drawing on my refrigerator that says, "This is where we will live when we are rich." I used to look at it and feel a complicated thing, love and worry and something that lived in between. Now I look at it and I think we got there, not the way Abby imagined when she drew it, but in the way that actually counts, with our name intact, our debts honest, and my daughter's heart beating steady and strong. A $4 part, that's what started it. And 32 years of knowing what to look for, and the guts to charge only for what I actually did. That's the whole story, and it's enough.